Welcome back to About Everything. My name is Dan Holland. I'm joined here today with Neil Howe, who, in addition to being one of the world's leading demographers, is a sector head here at Hedgeye. He's got an excellent new piece on our website, hedgeye.com, which you can go to after this interview and check out. It's called The Golden Age of Home Improvement. Nice to see you, Neil.
Great to be back, Dan.
Terrific. So tell me a little bit about this piece. What's going on here? What's happening? What are you seeing?
You know, it's interesting. About 3 years ago, we wrote a report for our clients called The Boom in Home Remodeling. And in that report, we predicted that home remodeling was an industry that was beginning to take off. And I think now you could say this industry is airborne. It's really doing exceptionally well. And, you know, in an economy like ours, you know, you really need, you need to search for the bright spots. And this is one of them. Total spending on home improvement is well above $300 billion now, and it's could hit an all-time high in 2016. It's been growing continuously faster than GDP now for, you know, last 6 or 7 years running.
Right.
And I think what's most amazing about this industry is that it's expanded in the face of this kind of catastrophic crunch that occurred in housing after 2007, right? Mm-hmm. It's interesting, if you look at total residential spending plunged 60% from its peak in the peak to trough during the Great Recession. Home improvement spending fall was only 13%, right? And it's now right back where it was. And what's more, you know, in housing, the big expansion, the disproportionate expansion has been in multi-unit. Mm-hmm. But home improvement, that remains, you know, a single-family story, you know, the single-family home. So we may not be building quite as many as we once were, but we sure are improving them, right? Right. And if you look as well at equity prices of this sector, which includes about 4 or 5 publicly traded companies, truly reflects this trend. Since 2010, January 2010, this sector is up 253%, and as you can see, that hugely outpaces the home building industry, which also obviously rebounded from there, and as well as the S&P 500. And so we're talking about Home Depot and Lowe's, the tile store, and we're obviously talking about a number of privately held companies that are growing at approximately the same rate. Many of these are more local than the publicly traded companies. So anyway, as we predicted, a boom. Yeah. It's going on. It's becoming bigger.
Now let me ask you a question before we move on to, you know, why it's happening, the drivers, et cetera. You know, you said at the beginning, you were talking about that this home remodeling, you know, tidal wave occurred in spite of the recession. Could you make an argument that it occurred because of it as well?
Well, that's kind of when we talk about the drivers. Right. I think part of it is because of it. It's a way to economize. You know, it's a way. In some ways, it's a way to buy your home bit by bit. Right. You know, you can buy your home uncompleted, unfinished. And as we're going to talk about this, a little bit of a strong Gen Xer trend, right? You don't want it all finished because you're going to finish it your own way in a special way. You know what I mean? Right. And it's a way you don't have to come up with all the cash at once in your house. So I think that yes, it's also related to the recession and the economic crunch we've had, in the sense that you have all these boomers who had more house than they ever really needed. Right. And now with their children coming back home, they finally figured out why they bought such a big house, right? Right, exactly. There was a plan all along, and they've figured out what it was.
So what are some of these drivers? What are you keying in on here?
Well, one thing is just to start out with basics, and that's the rising average age of homes. And I think I have to realize that in previous eras of our history, we had these enormous new infrastructures that we put in, whether it was the railroads or the interstates or whatever it was. We got rid of houses, you know, by the hundreds of thousands. You know, we knocked them all down and we built new ones. And we haven't really done that. It's been many decades since we've had a huge new sort of infrastructure makeover of America. So these houses are growing older, and they require, they require additional work as they grow older. What's more, these houses are better constructed. And you talk to any home builder, they will tell you that. Right. Better foundations, better plumbing, better electricity. Their environmental stuff is better. All the windows actually shut, and they stick around. They stick around for longer, and so in many ways, you can keep a house going through constant improvements. It doesn't become so old that you have to knock the whole damn thing down. And so in many ways, you could say that home remodeling is, in a sense, replacing home building, if you see what I mean. Yep. I mean, the basic chassis kind of stays intact, and you can continue to innovate on this thing. But the numbers are unambiguous. And in fact, I have a few here. 63% of the nation's houses are at least 30 years old. That's up from 47% as recently as 1995. So this is one driver. Right. A second driver is falling mobility rates. Americans aren't moving as much as they used to. This has been a long trend. It's really started in the early 80s. Constantly falling mobility rates. Partly that's due to the fact that we're an aging society. There are fewer younger families, more older families. Old people don't tend to move as much as younger people. But it's also true at every age we're moving less. Millennials, for young people in their 20s, are moving much less than Xers did or boomers did at the same age. You could say that reflects a lot of things. Attachment to their parents, maybe a risk aversion. Many economists actually think this decline in mobility is related to what they call the declining dynamism of the American economy. We also aren't creating, there's not as much job churn. We're not creating as many new businesses as we used to. So that's all related to declining geographic mobility is related to declining, economic turnover and creation of new jobs. You could say job mobility is falling as well. And what that means is then homeowners are more incentivized to take care of their own home, right? Rather than just say, well, someone else is going to have this home. So there's this mixing of your own personality with a house over time that takes place that did not used to take place, if you see where I'm going with this. And I think that you just look, boomers were used to have these shows that started back in the 1990s, This Old House, right? Right. And you're just going to find the spirit of this house, and you're going to unlock its inner ancient nature, right? You get all these wonderful things with this old house, and you're going to bring it back to life. And I think to some extent, even there's almost a cultural trend with boomers falling in love with the very antiquity, the very continuity of this structure, right? And I don't know, the boomers, GI generation parents never did that. Hell, it was just knock the damn thing down and build a new one, right? Economic recovery also is part of this. The homeowners who put off a lot of maintenance, in the early years of the economic recovery, are obviously playing catch up now. That's definitely entering into it. And then there is, and you knew I was going to come to this, Dan. Right. Generational change, right? For me, I always bring that up. One thing that we see is boomers are not retiring like their parents did. They are, as the AARP says, aging in place. They are forming what are called NORCs, naturally occurring retirement communities. So this is what they're doing. They're not going off to Arizona or Florida. They're sticking around where they are for many reasons. One is because they're working longer. And the other is because they're staying close to their kids. Right. And what that means is, and they've got these huge houses that they built, the McMansion era, kind of starting in the late 80s, going all the way up to the early 00s. They bought these huge houses as, trophies, yuppie trophies. And now, as we discussed earlier, they're figuring out why they need these things because they have these extended families coming home, or maybe they have, as they get into retirement years, they have a his and hers room, for the Mr. and Mrs. They have big hobby rooms. They're inviting their grandkids back into their homes. whatever it is. Anyway, they're aging in place and they're sticking around.
Right.
Among Xers, it's really interesting. And by the way, here we have a slide on this, by the way, which is fascinating. And this slide basically shows that boomers account for half of all home remodeling spending. And if you throw in the leading wave Xers, so people born mainly in the 1960s, right? This is 3/4 of the market. So everyone older and everyone younger just really don't matter in this market. So the boomer centrism of this home remodeling trend, I think, is important. And as I show in this other slide here, you can see how, although boomers' families are getting smaller, the share of living in single-family detached homes is unchanging, right? Which is really interesting. They're getting divorced, their kids are moving away, but they're not moving into apartments. You know, they're staying where they are. Let's talk for a couple of minutes about Gen Xers. Okay, now Gen Xers are, as I've often discussed on this forum, the most economically hard-pressed generation in America in terms of the hit they took in the Great Crash, particularly in terms of housing and assets, and the fact that many of them are barely hanging on. Some of them have gotten modifications by the bank to be able to keep their homes, but they're kind of hopelessly sitting here. They're locked into their homes. Many of them can't move. They're having a hard time moving up. So home remodeling is a way in which they can, improve rather than move up to a new house. Just improve the house they have. Many Xers, if they're moving into a nice neighborhood because of the schools, and let's face it, most Xers don't care about all the status symbol stuff so much. But when it comes to schools and some of the basics, maybe it's close to their work, they care about that. And even if they can't afford it immediately, they'll buy a house that's kind of stripped down, and then they'll improve it later. You know what I mean?
Of course.
So that they can make it more affordable on the purchase and improve it later. And one other thing about Xers I think you'll appreciate, Dan, and that is this idea that they customize things in weird, idiosyncratic, totally eclectic ways, right? They might be running a business out of one wing. They'll have one house where they'll be remodeling old cars, or just crazy stuff.
Right.
And there's no way a home builder can know what this is. So the whole idea of kind of selling or trading a somewhat unfinished house that this Xer can customize and modify to their own weird personal tastes.
Yeah, exactly.
The strange colors on the walls and the whatever retro.
Speaking from experience, I'm just one data point, one Gen X data point, but I've got a ton of friends and family who are in this generation, and I'm seeing a tremendous amount of exactly what you're talking about. I mean, there's, it's adding on, it's putting on dormers on the house, putting on a new bedroom, everything that you're talking about, rather than just knocking the house down and putting a brand new one up.
And a symptom of this is how Gen Xers are trashing all of the home ownership association rules that boomers set up. There are all these tasteful things you're supposed to do, and then comes in this Xer family. Now I'm going to leave my pickup truck in the driveway, and I'm going to build this weird room out there, and I really don't care if you like it or not.
Right, exactly.
So you see the generational frontal wave, wrecking homeowner association rules across America. And then finally you've got, and this is the killer. I mean, this is the trend that's probably the most important of all, and it perfectly syncs with the boomer trend I talk about, and that's the renaissance in multi-generational living. And that probably is the single biggest driver of all. As you can see here, the percentage of adults aged 25 to 34-year-olds living in multi-generational households, from reaching its all-time low in American history in 1980 when boomers occupied that bracket to today with you have millennials. This is more than a doubling in the share. In fact, an interesting statistic recently coming out from Pew, the share of women age 18 to 34 living with their parents is the highest since 1940. That's actually slightly higher than 1940. So we're really back to Great Depression era time. Now, a lot of that's because these women are marrying later, right? They stick with their families. That's
but this is beyond that, right? I mean, this is the the proverbial 30-year-old living in his basement, right? In his parents' basement. Isn't that what you're talking about here? Like Paul Ryan, wasn't he talking about that at the convention? living in mom and dad's basement. This is a function.
But here's the difference, is that Gen Xers like Paul Ryan think of that as defeat.
Right.
How humiliating for this millennial to be living
Exactly.
there. Millennials don't think it's humiliating at all. It's, and I often say that Gen Xer, had to boomerang back home. Do you remember that phrase in the 1990s, boomerang? And that was this humiliation
Yep.
of having to go back. Millennials don't boomerang back home. They never leave.
Yeah.
See the difference? I mean, it's perfectly comfortable for them. They get along great with mom and dad. So here is the trend, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And we can talk a little bit about some of the implications. But as you were mentioning earlier, I mean, you just see it in the pop culture, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, moving along here, what are the broader implications here? I mean, looking forward down the road, I mean, what are some of the the bigger macro 10,000 foot implications here?
Well, one thing that's useful to keep in mind, and that's just in people thinking about this industry from an investment perspective, and it's one thing you brought up earlier, and that is we're talking disproportionately about the affluent.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they
Right.
are the ones that are spending big bucks on this. And let's face it, I mean, boomers are the ones who remain employed after the during the great crash. They were the ones who were constantly getting new jobs
Right.
throughout 2010 and 11 and 12 and 13 and so on. And you can see this. We have a slide here that shows where people are spending
Yep.
on home improvement, and as you can see, this is disproportionately the high-priced coastal urban areas. And in fact, some of the private companies which are big in this industry, such as Golden State Lumber and Ganal Lumber down in the LA area and so on, they serve these pricey markets. But you can just see where the spending is. Much less spending in the lower, more reasonably priced kind of middle America.
Yeah.
And also when you go up by income bracket, you see a higher and higher share of income being spent on home improvement at higher income brackets. So this is definitely up there in your kind of restoration hardware.
I mean, it's an unbelievable chart. I mean, the whole Northeast corridor, Massachusetts, New York City, it's just flooded with exactly what you're talking about. And then and same thing in California. Pretty remarkable.
Yeah. A second kind of interesting angle here is, and I've been giving this some thought and actually been doing discussions with some people in the industry I know, but that's the sharing economy aspect of this.
Mm-hmm.
So Airbnb, as you know, is kind of transforming how people are using their houses and their apartments and so on. And what it is creating a very large retail market for home improvements to individuals who in effect are their own businesses.
Right.
So in a sense, the home remodeling at a retail level is replacing commercial remodeling that a hotel might engage with. Although, as we know, for a series of reasons, it's so much more efficient and cheaper for an individual to rent out their home than for a hotel. I don't have to follow any of those regulations and Americans with Disability Act, and I don't have to pay all these, right? So that is, I think, actually another big, and I think that is actually coming on stream now. That is actually gaining steam now. Mm-hmm. Think if you are a homeowner who is selling, renting your place on Airbnb. Mm-hmm. There are reviews, there are videos and photographs, and everyone can see your place and comment on it. This is a business decision for you. This isn't just a lifestyle decision. You're going to make more money by investing in your own, and you're going to do it through a retailer, right? Like these home improvement places. So,
and you see that increasing, in the years to come. The Airbnb.
There are already over 1 million units being rented online at Airbnb. Wow. You look at, count all the others as well.
Yep.
That's rivaling the entire hospitality industry.
Right. And God forbid somebody, comments on Airbnb that your, home looks like the Brady Bunch or something like that.
Yes, and they're dealing with that. I think and there are those complaints, and I sympathize with people who have that. Particularly when you go to a well-traveled, you go to Miami or Santa Monica and so on, they do have these places, right? And if you are a permanent tenant and you have all these kids coming and going, that's a problem.
Exactly.
I will say, I think Airbnb has been very clever in politically mobilizing those who use Airbnb to show up at all of these local government hearings. So they are organized at the grassroots level. They're a little bit less lawyer-oriented than Uber.
Right.
I mean, Uber basically gets out their lawyers, but Airbnb very effectively mobilizes the actual renters. Right. And finally, and this just close on this aspect, and that is, these home remodeling firms are betting big on high technology. And one of the fascinating things when you look at Lowe's and Home Depot, Lowe's and Microsoft, for instance, has teamed up to create an in-store augmented reality thing, where you can go and actually reimagine, what your room is going to look like if you put in this or that appliance or paint it in this kind of room. And apparently, Ikea has created an online virtual reality app that allows visitors to look at their room or see how rooms are transformed with certain things in them.
Yep.
And as you know, with Nest and various, a lot of the things that Home Depot is now selling, the whole idea of an electronically wired home appeals to both boomers, Xers, and millennials. It appeals to all generations, really. And I think that the digitization of everything from home security to heating and lighting and all of the conveniences is a whole new product line that's going in. So it's not just in being able to using high tech to imagine your home in very innovative ways and to come across easier to the consumer, but also it's spawning a whole new generation of products which you can retrofit your home with. You may have an old hardwired burglary system, but now you can do it all digital, and in your app you can see your home when you're away on a trip or
They
whatever.
you can actually have it set up now where when someone rings your doorbell, I could be sitting at work and I can actually answer the doorbell from work.
And let them in. And let them in.
Or tell them to get lost.
Yeah.
Right.
Or tell them you're calling the police.
Yeah,
yes.
Exactly.
But yeah, this is this is kind of sexy, and this is new, but I particularly love these virtual reality, kind of augmented reality ways of seeing your home, being transformed. I just think that's really cool, and so that's kind of at least one place where the industry's going. Right.
So what are the what are the key takeaways here? Broader, what are the takeaways here for these home remodeling?
Well, just some big ones, and I just have 3 of them here. The first is that boomers are building onto their homes to make room for their kids and grandkids. Again, this revival of multi-generational living. Grandkids, by the way. I think I have a picture of a recent Wall Street Journal article on this. Huge spending, on companies that provide sort of boutique solutions to providing special rooms for your grandkids. It's just unbelievable how much this whole feeling of family reunification is generating spending. And boomers will need universal designs. These are the door handles that are go like this, and the wider doors and all the various things. So you see some of that going on. For Xers, I think what's really interesting is this way of using home remodeling to save money on the purchase, to customize their homes, and also to increasingly engage in kind of the DIY mentality, which is so intrinsic to Xers, right? Xers want to get rid of the middleman and do it themselves. And interestingly, we find in the data, this is the Harvard Joint Center on Housing, which recently did a big report on home improvement. Xers are over twice as likely to do it themselves, than boomers. So they're actually just buying the raw stuff and figuring how to install it themselves. Although I will say both Home Depot and Lowe's, one of their big innovations recently is they've become a hub of all of these small home improvement companies, which now sell their services through these kind of aggregate home service websites. And finally, you have millennials. I mean, millennials are living in these larger houses, often with their families, and as they become themselves homeowners, and they will, I think, there's a lot of them, and I think that they are accustomed to helping mom and dad remodel their home, and they're going to be doing a lot of it themselves. I think particularly this kicker with the with the sharing economy, I think that that's going to provide an extra stage, almost an extra, rocket stage to this boom. And I think, we have another 10 years to go in this. Wow. I think this is a long boom. I think eventually, of course, everyone's going to kind of move up into entirely new phases of life. But I think this is a trend with legs, and it's still in its reasonably early stages.
Right.
Yeah.
Now let me ask you a few questions before you jump. Getting back to the Gen Xers takeaway about the do-it-yourselfers. I mean, does some of that would you submit that a lot of that has to do with the YouTubing, where people can actually go on like how to install crown molding, or any number of websites that'll actually walk you through step by step. So the Gen Xers actually just go online, spend 5-10 minutes watching how it's done, and then they go to Home Depot or Lowe's, whatever they go, and go do it themselves.
Yes, and in fact, Lowe's and Home Depot now themselves curate, hundreds of these videos.
Right.
So they themselves will say, hey, we got a video, we'll walk you through exactly how to install this. So they have to sell it on multi levels. I mean, at the one hand, they will sell it to the local home improvement company.
Right.
That's going to fully install it for the boomer, and it's going to be this beautiful thing, and and they know how to do it. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, it has to very much actively, sell to the 40-year-old who basically says, I'm going to do this myself.
Right.
So
right.
No question about that.
That would be me. Now, a couple other questions here. So you mentioned Home Depot and Lowe's. Are there any other names out there, that are in play?
I think a couple names that we have, Home Depot, Lowe's, Tile Store is another big publicly traded one. There are a couple of Canadian ones, including Rona, which I think either Home Depot and Lowe's is just about to acquire.
Yep.
They got cash.
Right.
They can start buying.
Right.
And I think I think a lot of them are privately held, as I'm saying, particularly a lot of the local ones. A lot of the more regional ones are privately held.
Sure.
But you have about, if you look at including the two Canadian ones, I think you're looking at maybe 5 publicly held companies that you can trade in, and you can look on your own for the privately held. But it's as I said, you look at the entire industry, over 300 million. Obviously, that includes all the local contractors.
Right.
But interestingly, Home Depot and Lowe's, because they're becoming the hubs, the home service centers for these private contractors, they're actually beginning to take a share of all that contractor revenue.
Right.
Because the contractors pay them to advertise their services in the local area.
Oh, absolutely. You walk into a Home Depot and someone's got a flyer in your face as soon as you walk in the front there, trying to get you, to sign up. I don't know if you've had that experience. One last question before we go here. So, as our housing team here, our analysts, Josh Steiner, Christian Drake, we recently turned bearish, on the sector overall. How does what we're talking about here, what you're talking about here today, how does that jibe within our bearish thesis? I mean, it bolsters it, no? Or
it bolsters it. Actually, I think these two sectors are not correlated. They might even have a slightly negative correlation.
Right.
I mean, not strictly speaking. Obviously, during the Great Recession, both of them tanked. Mm-hmm. But the point is, home improvement only fell a little bit. And I think over a longer period of time, there may even be an inverse correlation. That is to say, when times get hard, families have to live more together and so forth. People can't afford to buy new homes.
Right.
They're gonna work more incrementally on what's inside.
Yeah.
And I agree with Josh's estimate of the future of the sector. I think it is trending down, but that's a great reason for diversification into this sector.
Yeah.
Because I think, as I suggested before, increasingly home remodeling is actually replacing an aspect of home rebuilding in these older houses.
Exactly. You had those two. You showed a couple charts. One in particular towards the beginning of our discussion, where you're showing precisely that. That this industry never cooled, and it's outpacing home building dramatically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, golden age of home remodeling. It's here, and it's going to be with us for a while. It's a great part of the industry for investors to consider on the long side.
Neil, thank you so much for joining us today. It's always a treat for us. You can follow Neil on Twitter at Howe Generation, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Thanks again, Neil.